In 2023, to prepare for Makoto Shinkai's upcoming movie Suzume, I had a friend come over to watch 5 cm per second with me. It was a rewatch for me, but a first for him. After watching in delight as he struggled to process the ending, we realized we still had a good chunk of the night left to hang out, as 5 cm per second is kind of on the shorter side, and that's when he suggested watching the first few episodes or so of RWBY. And oh boy, if I knew that night I would begin properly watching what would become one of my favorite animated series of all time, well, nothing really would change, but it still would have been cool to know. RWBY is a show that I tried to give a shot back when it originally started, but 14-year-old me couldn't get past how ugly I found the show to be with its janky and low-budget looking animation. Pair that with the very whimsical and light story of Volume 1, and you have a 14-year-old who decided to drop the show and go back to replaying Sonic Adventure DX on his GameCube for the 50th time. I wish I could go back in time and make myself watch it, because to experience how this series progressed and evolved over the years and talk about new episodes and stuff with the fanbase as they were coming out would have been so cool. But alas, this video series will fill that hole in my heart a little bit at least. RWBY was a show we talked about every now and then in passing at work, especially with the Ice Queendom anime which I was interested in, and of course Volume 9's release in early 2023. Me and my friend do this thing where we take turns recommending each other a piece of media to watch, which end up typically being anime, and RWBY was one he thought about having me watch. But it never ended up happening, as other series like Evangelion took priority, which I have no complaints with, because binging all of Evangelion, then the end of Evangelion, then the first Rebuild films, then seeing Thrice Upon a Time in theaters all in a relatively short span of time was an amazingly wild and emotional roller coaster. That series made me feel so many different things, and I absolutely want to talk about how stellar, unique, and emotional it is in a video at some point, even if countless other people already have. But getting back to RWBY, I always had a mild interest in the show despite never giving it a proper shot when I was older. Whenever a new volume came out and clips from it circulated online, well, first I was impressed that the show was still going on, to be honest, but I did always make it a point to take a look at how the character designs have changed, how the animation looks different, and then of course listen to some of the fantastic music. And it seemed like a series I'd like. A long-running action-adventure series with an interesting setting, memorable cast of characters with really cool designs, weapons, and fighting styles. Then there's the ambitious fight sequences with some of the best choreography and use of locations in said fights I've ever seen, and a consistently stellar soundtrack. Is this 3D anime Sonic but with waifus? That is a question that often plagued my mind, and to finally be able to sleep at night, I needed answers. So when my friend suggested we watch the trailers and then the first few episodes of RWBY, I said, sure. And let me tell you, I was hooked right away. The following months would see me binging RWBY while working out or eating, with my friend coming over whenever he could so he could have the fun of watching it with someone who's witnessing it for the first time. And yeah, like I said earlier, it's one of my favorite animated properties of all time. Now, it's not perfect, and I'm not making this video to convince you that it's peak fiction or anything like that. This show has a lot of ups and downs which I will discuss going forward, but I don't know, there's something so earnest about it. Like, even in its lowest of lows, I feel this sense of passion and excitement, like the people making it are just genuinely trying to make a thrilling and compelling animated series for everyone to enjoy, to take inspiration and hope from. Now, I know a lot's come out about Rooster Teeth and their poor working conditions. I'm not oblivious to that side of things. But hey, I'm a Jujutsu Kaisen fan after all. I'm used to enjoying amazing content at the suffering of underpaid and overworked people. Seriously, Studio Mappa, please just be better. While these conditions and what's come out about the company are unfortunate, to put it mildly, I don't think that detracts from the effort of those involved in the creation of the show. I have to imagine the people involved with this show have a passion for the series they're making and the story they're telling. Otherwise, why continue to work in such poor conditions? And that's why I still want to talk about why I find the show to be so compelling and unique, because lots of genuine care and effort was put into this series, and it all deserves to be talked about, and talk about it I will in this video. As I said earlier, RWBY is like a roller coaster. It has its ups and downs, and even putting the quality aside, it's just a show that's changed a lot over the years. So, this will be a multi-part retrospective video series, with each part going over a volume and any shorts or trailers associated with it. There will also be a couple parts going over the additional spin-off RWBY content, stuff like Ice Queendom, RWBY Chibi, the Justice League crossover movies, maybe World of Remnant, the video games, the manga, the books, and anything else in between. RWBY has a lot of additional content, and as much as I'd love to do a full franchise review of everything RWBY related, I just can't afford to do that time-wise. I still have other projects and goals I'm working on, so I'll do 1 or 2 big videos going over a lot of this additional content, and maybe down the road I'll do smaller one-off uploads going over stuff I couldn't cover or didn't go super in-depth with. I'll also do a Volume 10 review series because I haven't given up hope on seeing RWBY get a proper finale. I am also currently toying with the idea of another part to this retrospective, which would go over some of the really great fan-made RWBY content there is out there. There is obviously a lot, so I couldn't get it all, but I do have my eyes on a couple things in particular, such as the Evermorrow AU series, which looks really interesting, and Dust Queen, which as of recording this video only has one episode out so far, but is really impressive regardless. And no, I didn't name those two specifically just because they both look like they still have Torchwick alive in them and he is best boy. But also, maybe I did. That's for me and my second soul to know. But anyways, it is genuinely awesome to see so many people passionate about RWBY making their own stories or series with their own unique takes on the world and characters, especially with a setting and cast of characters as expansive as RWBY's. It's something I love to see with any franchise or property. Not to keep drawing comparisons to Sonic the Hedgehog, but that's also a series with an insane amount of dedicated fan content. RWBY is just 3D anime girl Sonic, and this entire video series will be dedicated to proving that. If you have any particular suggestions for fan-made RWBY content that you think would be interesting to look at and talk about, please let me know in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions, and I do read every comment that I get. And if you want to recommend particular spin-off RWBY content to check out in this series, let me know as well. I can't promise that I'll 100% cover your picks and suggestions, but I will make it a point to look into it at least, and maybe give it a brief mention in the video even if I didn't actually check it out. So, with all that being said, this is Noah's Archive. I am Noah Yun, an actor, voice actor, writer, aspiring filmmaker, and a lot of other things that make my parents wonder why they spent money on a nice education for me. And for today's video, I will be pulling out a show that my friend once described to me as a series of different AMVs with a loosely connecting story. I'd argue there's a bit more to RWBY than that, even if much of the show does make for great AMV material, and I'll try to start explaining why that is with part 1 of this RWBY retrospective series. Now let's begin talking about the first 4 RWBY trailers that introduced us to these lovable characters and the setting of Remnant. Now this is how you market and tease a show. Instead of just giving us a standard trailer with clips from the show to give viewers a taste of what's to come, Monty and Rooster Teeth decided to make 4 unique trailers focused on each of the main characters, cleverly introducing us not to just these characters, but the setting at large and just what the show itself is like. They're canon, bite-sized episodes that show off Monty's fast-paced and dance-like fight choreography, dynamic camera work, insane but awesome weapon design, an overall sense of style and visual flair with its ambitious set pieces and shot composition. I mean, these aren't just good trailers, they're good pieces of animation. Period. The red and white trailers tell you so much about RWBY and Weiss with so little, they don't even speak in them. Weiss does sing though. But through their fighting styles, weapon choices, or tiny moments of characterization like RWBY's little smile here, you learn so much about these characters. And that's not to mention just how epic they are, especially RWBY's with Red Like Roses Part 1 giving off this somber, mysterious atmosphere as she walks towards a grave, only for the music to pick up as she starts fighting. I mean, it's like universally agreed upon that RWBY's soundtrack is always top tier stuff, and that Jeff Williams is a musical genius. With credit of course going to Casey Lee Williams as well for her powerful vocals throughout the series run and taking over as lead composer in Volume 9. I still can't believe the person singing these songs is only 14 years old. That is insane talent. And honestly, that goes for everyone involved in these trailers. Whoever made the creative decision to make trailers that tell unique one-off stories that introduce us to the characters and setting at large, as opposed to normal trailers, is a genius. The animation, while dated and janky, clearly shows the talent of Monty and the rest of the crew through the amazing choreography and overall direction, even outside of the fight sequences. I mean, look at some of these shots. And the music is so engrossing, perfectly embodying the characters and events of the story unfolding. I know some people say that the lyrics of RWBY's soundtrack are too on the nose, and I do get that, but I actually really like the lyrics to all the songs. How blunt the lyrics are with what they're talking about makes it feel like they're literally embodying the characters. And I think it's cool for these characters to have such a noticeable presence in every aspect of the show, not just the writing and animation. And also, sometimes it's nice to have music that's simple to understand and not trying to be super abstract with what it's talking about. I like the characters and story, I think the music is very well made and catchy, so yeah, I have no issues with RWBY's soundtrack, aside from the fact that it dominated my Spotify Wrapped last year, so I had to explain to all my friends what the hell a RWBY even is. These trailers are not mandatory viewing. They are canon and introduce you to the characters, but any important information will be referenced or divulged in the show proper. I do think you're severely missing out by not watching them, however. Not just because they're amazing examples of how to build up hype for a show, but because they're just great additions to the world of RWBY. They're impressive and filled to the brim with confident showmanship. My only big complaints being that the writing is a little juvenile for Yane's trailer in the beginning, and the voice acting in Blake's leaves a lot to be desired. The voice acting thing is true for the show as a whole in its early stages in my opinion, but I do think the cast really grows into their roles and mature as voice actors and actresses as the series progresses. And it's not even everyone who has a rough start. There are some performances I love right away, like Torchwick's, but you do do sense some growing pains with a portion of the cast early on. I'm not sure if it was a direction thing or maybe if this was some of their first real voice acting roles, but some of their delivery is not the best, to put it lightly.
Blake, it's time.
But I do think as the series goes on, the voice acting overall significantly improves, especially with characters like Ironwood and Winter. And honestly, some of the awkward voice acting kinda helps the comedy in Volume 1 and overall adds to its charm, but maybe that's just me. So yeah, overall the trailers are an amazing introduction to the characters and setting of RWBY. They're canon but non-essential short stories that show off the series' extravagant fight scenes, all while still giving us an important look at our main cast of characters, and with killer music of course. But if you were to only watch one, I would say have it be the Black trailer. As much as I think RWBY's Red trailer is the best with how it manages to be so epic and exciting despite its simple setting and, to be honest, a non-existent story, I think seeing what happens in Blake's trailer adds a lot of weight to her character, especially when she brings up her past and Adam becomes a more relevant character as the series progresses. And the location of it being on a train lends itself to some really cool moments in the action sequences and creative framing of its shots. So yeah, those were the 4 character trailers that kickstarted the wonderful series that is RWBY. Let's begin talking about the first full volume. So now that I'm done whining about how more shows should make unique and original content to promote themselves as opposed to standard trailers, what do I think of Volume 1? It's a pretty great start to the show. It's not perfect, the writing can be a bit clunky at times, and the humor sometimes tends to be a little bit juvenile for my liking, but one thing this first volume absolutely has down to a T, aside from Monty's amazing fight scenes, is the tone. I don't intend on going through each episode of the series and recapping it beat for beat, but for the sake of discussing the tone of the show, I'm gonna do that for episode 1. So, it starts with a narrated exposition dump about stuff like Remnant, the origin of mankind, and Dust. And yeah, this is a good example of clunky exposition, but I do understand why you'd want to get this stuff out there as soon as possible. When you have a show with a limited runtime per episode like RWBY Volume 1, you probably want to spend as much time with the meat of your story. In this series' case, that would be the quirky characters and high-octane fight scenes. Of course, the setting does matter, especially as the story goes forward, but you really need to hook viewers with the core foundation of your show. So this narrated exposition dump at the beginning does get the job done, but where it excels at is setting the tone of the show. As whimsical and lighthearted RWBY Volumes 1, 2, and half of 3 are, there is a sense of a grander story at play, whether it be through the kinetic fight scenes that would be way too good for just a random lighthearted high school series, the actual dialogue of the characters, such as Ozpin reflecting on how the characters should cherish their youthful innocence in Volume 2, implying that the road ahead of them won't be as simple or cheery, or the actual escalating stakes of the story, such as how Volume 2 ends in what's essentially a terrorist attack caused by a civil rights movement. We'll circle back to that one, trust me. For as lighthearted and silly as RWBY likes to be, it's clear that the show has more in store for its story than high school hijinks split up by cool fight scenes. And honestly, that's one of the many things I love about these first few volumes. It almost feels like a representation of growing up. Like being a teenager in high school and knowing that you'll have to become more responsible and serious in the future, but still enjoying your youth and freedom in the moment. I think that unique feeling of still being a kid but getting closer and more aware of adulthood is something RWBY exemplifies really well through its story. A story of wacky and fun characters goofing around while looming threats. A personification of adulthood slowly seeps its way into the story. Where was I going with all this? Oh right, the tone set by the beginning of episode 1. While the nature of this exposition dump may be questionable, it does have a very epic feel to it, with its simple but storybook-like presentation, very fitting for a series so inspired by fairy tales, and the narrator herself casting a very ominous atmosphere with her closing lines that starts with the cut to Torchwick and his henchmen walking towards the dust shop. Also, just by Torchwick existing, the start of this series is automatically peak fiction because he is one of my favorite villains ever. He is so delightfully evil, and he's actually a stellar first antagonist for this series, but I'll save that more for when I start talking about the character specifically. And then of course, this introduction monologue is taken over by a male narrator, who closes things off with the core of the show, how victory can lie in the simpler things, such as an honest soul, which then cuts to RWBY, who of course is the simple, honest soul of the series. At least for a while, I feel like the series kinda loses track of this theme and idea, but I can't knock it for that yet. In the vacuum of this episode, it is a great way to end the opening monologue. So yeah, in just 2 minutes you get exposition about the setting of the story, But more importantly, you get the tone of the series set to you, both its vast and epic scope, and its simpler side as it transitions to focusing on Ruby and the dust store being robbed. Pair that with the fact that it ends by cleverly showing us the character who embodies the core theme of the show, and I say that's a pretty impressive start all things considered. Now I know that the world building and lore of the show isn't the best, and it gets to the point where they make a whole separate series just to exposit it to you, but I'll talk more about that later. In terms of starting a story and setting the tone for the show, this beginning monologue, and really first episode overall, does a great job. Another cool thing I want to point out about this section before continuing on with the episode is the quick shot of the moon we get. It's such a great piece of unspoken world building. Seeing that immediately raises questions in the viewer. Why is the moon like that? Is that just how the moon is within the context of the show? Did something happen to the moon? Will this ever be addressed? For as clunky and awkward as the writing can get, especially in the world building department, I do think there is a great deal of skill and care put into carefully crafting and fleshing out this world efficiently. I love subtle storytelling like this. Not everything needs to be explained. Sometimes just showing the unique quirk of a story setting and letting the viewer's imagination run wild with them is the better option. That's not to say everything should be left to interpretation, and RWBY definitely suffers with ambiguity with how certain things work in the future, but I think there's merit in letting the viewers theorize and discover parts of this world along with the characters. It makes for a more engaging experience. It makes it so the viewer has to actively seek out answers and connect pieces of the puzzle together. And RWBY does this a lot throughout its early run. So even when you're having mundane or basic episodes like John's bully arc, we still get to learn more about the setting of the story. Getting back to the beginning of episode 1 though, Torchwick's goons approach RWBY, and we enter the series' first main fight scene set to the opening song of Volume 1, This'll Be the Day. This song is a great choice for this scene, not just for how hype it is, but for how its lyrics relate to the story. The first few lyrics describing someone being viewed as a helpless child, which is obviously what Torchwick's gang thought of RWBY. The final lyrics of the first chorus talking about a dream coming true, which is exactly what happens for RWBY, as this encounter is what allows her to enter Beacon Academy at a young age, to start working towards her goal of becoming a huntress. And of course the closing line of the chorus, victory is in a simple soul, which harkens back to the ending of the monologue from just a minute ago. I love the decision to actually have the vocal songs play over the fight scenes in the show. It can admittedly be a little distracting at times, but it makes rewatching and re-listening to the music and fights really satisfying when you see the harmony between the story unfolding through these fights and the songs being sung. Most of the lyrics for the songs in RWBY, as I already said, are pretty on the nose, but that doesn't stop them from being really good with lyrics like the previously mentioned ending to the chorus of This'll Be the Day. Having vocal songs for so many of the key fights throughout the show gives the series a really strong sense of identity, as each fight almost becomes its own story that you can just view on its own when you have the lyrics of the song to guide your understanding. You're not gonna fully understand the setting and characters, but you should at least be able to get a sense of the emotional stakes in the characters themselves. This isn't the case for every instance of vocal songs being played in RWBY, but regardless, I really enjoy RWBY's usage of vocal themes for its series. RWBY continues to fight Torchwick's goons before chasing after him as he tries to escape. As Torchwick and Cinder try to escape in an aircraft, we meet Glenda Goodwitch, who saves RWBY and gives us a peek at the power of hunters and huntresses in the series. This scene is also another good example of effective world building, as Torchwick is the one who tells Cinder there's a huntress attacking them, which is a pretty natural way of conveying that information as opposed to having RWBY say it, even though she does so in the scene afterwards, but that fits with her being starstruck with meeting one. Cinder looks more menacing than she does in the entire rest of the show as they decide to keep her a silhouette instead of fully revealing her design. She and Glenda trade blows, and Cinder and Torchwick manage to escape. RWBY is quickly interrogated by Glenda before being approached by Professor Ozpin. This scene's really good, because even though Ozpin just asking RWBY why she wants to be a huntress is a really blunt way of getting to what motivates her as a character, being asked this directly does allow RWBY to launch into this tangent that goes to show just how down-to-earth or simple she is. She doesn't have these super complex or intricate thoughts behind her actions. She wants to help people because that's who her parents raised her to be, a gracious person, and doing so by becoming a huntress makes the most sense to her, and it doesn't hurt that she thinks they're super cool too. She is certainly a simple character who embodies the previously mentioned theme of victory being found in simpler things like earnest souls, but I'll talk more about her as a character later. Ozpin lets her into Beacon Academy. We cut to a scene of Yane's reaction to this where we get to see how the two bounce off each other. A news broadcast reveals Torchwick's name for the first time in the show and starts upsetting the super tasteful White Fang story beats, and we set off to Beacon Academy, ending the episode on a puke joke as John gets vomit on Yane's shoes because of motion sickness. Definitely a whimper of an end. I just don't find that kind of humor funny, but it does fit into the more lighthearted tone that the show's trying to establish. and we at least get the epic opening right afterwards to make up for it a bit. So yeah, that's episode 1, an occasionally clunky but super effective introduction to every aspect of the show, the lighthearted and fun side of its setting and characters, the bigger scope of the story that's not fully coming into play yet, the beautifully choreographed fight scenes, the iconic music. Everything that is RWBY can be found in this first episode, minus, other characters' existence like Blake and Weiss. And the reason I went through that first episode discussing how every writing decision, story beat, and directorial choice was made is because everything I just ranted and raved about for episode 1 applies to the whole of volume 1. This balancing act of fun and lighthearted storytelling with more serious and character-driven moments is what volume 1 excels at, giving us zany but endearing characters who bounce off each other in really fun ways, establishing who they are and what motivates them through small-scale and whimsical adventures, before tossing them into situations slowly but surely escalating in intensity. And throughout all of this is the show's amazingly dynamic fight scenes, memorable and infectious soundtrack, and sometimes juvenile and clunky but overall solid character writing and world building. All of this builds up to the Volume 1 finale, which, while still relatively small in scope, especially compared to what's in store, really digs into the meat of 2 characters in particular, and throws Team RWBY into their most dangerous confrontation yet. And it does all this while still introducing new characters and setting up what's to come. Volume 1 balances all this without feeling jarring or awkward. Its engaging mastery of different tones and story beats makes for a really fun and memorable adventure, which is what the story's trying to be right now. An exciting thrill ride that embodies the innocence of youth with its fun characters, while still slowly building up to something larger in scope. And this volume and its tone is especially helpful to the overall pacing of volumes 1 through 3, which I'll talk about later. I said earlier that some of the writing can come off as a bit juvenile or clunky, but I do think most of it fits really well with the vibe of the show. It just might not be my cup of tea. That being said, for every moment that did make me cringe or roll my eyes, there were moments before or afterwards that I did enjoy. Sojan vomiting on Yane's shoes isn't peak comedy, but Yane immediately ditching RWBY to hang out with their silhouette friends is pretty funny. So making Nora's "I'm Queen of the Castle" chant wasn't the best thing to make my ringtone, which I forgot to turn off during a relative's funeral. But John screaming only to cut to Yane immediately saying "some girl's in trouble" with a genuine look of concern on her face is probably the funniest moment of the entire volume. And so John does have the most stereotypical bully arc ever that takes up 3 of Volume 1's episodes, but I do quite like the ending where the Fire Emblem character, Pyrrha, helps him out but doesn't tell him to boost his confidence. The good more than outweighs the bad, and the more I reflect on it, I'm not even sure what I consider bad is bad in this case. It just might not be my thing. Some of it's lowbrow or silly, but so are people around the ages of the RWBY cast. I can't tell you how long I overused "that's what she said" jokes when I first heard them in the office as a teenager. Teenagers aren't always the most sophisticated when it comes to how they act and talk, so these immature or silly moments do really mesh well with the vibe of the show, which still has a ton of genuinely great comedy. That's not to excuse genuinely bad or awkward writing, because this volume does still have that. Like when Pyrrha just stops the episode to tell Jean about Aura in the Emerald Forest. And I know it works in context, because we later find out that Jean isn't as experienced as we think he should be because he got into Beacon with fake transcripts, but still, it is literally a character stopping to exposit world building. Made worse by the fact that stuff like semblance and aura become so ambiguous and interchangeable as the series goes on, but that's not the fault of this volume. Another example of bad writing is how on-the-nose and almost comedically racist Weiss is in the second to last episode, and how quickly that goes away because we need to end with the team reunited and happy. I'm sure the intent was good, to show someone with prejudice genuinely learn from the error of their ignorant ways and become a better and more accepting person. Instead, what we got was comparing a different species to literal garbage cans. Minor conflict and conversation surrounding said derogatory remarks that cause Blake to leave because she is a faunus, and then after the big final battle of Volume 1 happens, Weiss is all like, "You're my teammate, I value you." And we missed a step here, guys. We missed the part where Weiss has to actually reevaluate her racist worldviews and learn that not all faunus are criminals and murderers like she perceives them to be. They went out of their way to give Weiss reason for her prejudice, faunus killing family, friends, and employees and causing serious issues for her father's business. But then they skip the part where she has to realize that not all faunus are like that, or maybe there's issues with her father's business that cause things to escalate to such an extent. You could argue it happened off screen, but that's not good writing. Instead we get, is racist, and then is quickly not racist? And they did good in explaining why she thinks the way she does regarding the faunus. It's foolish and ignorant to assume something of a whole species based off the actions of a few, but as a character flaw for Weiss to overcome, that's genuinely good stuff. But instead of using that to show a thoughtful portrayal of someone overcoming their own biases or past trauma, to realize the way they view certain aspects of the world is fundamentally flawed, we get this half-assed arc? I hesitate to even call it that. Say what you want about how silly or immature Weiss and RWBY's reconciliation at the end of episode 10 is. At least we're shown how she got there. She saw RWBY's immaturity, got frustrated that someone like RWBY was chosen as leader over her, she lashes out at RWBY, who fails to understand why Weiss is acting this way. Weiss gets humbled in a conversation with Port, meanwhile RWBY is being advised by Ozpin to be responsible. Weiss at the end of the night sees RWBY asleep surrounded by books, implying she studied until she fell asleep due to exhaustion, and they have a heartwarming conversation where Weiss not only confides to RWBY that she has what it takes to be a great leader, but that she'll also be the best teammate she can be for her. Characters had conflict, they learned, they grew. It's simple, but it's good and heartwarming development. Compare that to Weiss at the end of the volume and it goes, she's racist, here's why, and now she's not. The equivalent to this with what I was just talking about would be if right after Weiss storms away from RWBY in episode 10 after Port's class, we cut to the scene at night where Weiss sees RWBY asleep and surrounded by books, which, if this long tangent hasn't made it clear already, would not be satisfying. If you want a character to change or grow, you need to actually show how that happens through challenging their beliefs or mindsets. You can't just skip that part. Unless you're Weiss at the end of Volume 1. Again, I don't doubt that the writer's intentions were good, but if you're gonna have a character be racist, you have to put in the work to show how they eventually learn that their ignorant worldviews are mistaken. You can't just not do that and have them go back to being the same quirky and fun character and hope they get a pass because they're an anime waifu. And I like Weiss as a character, a lot, especially in later volumes, but I can't not think of how this aspect of her character was never properly addressed or confronted whenever I think of her good traits. And while I'm on this spiel about misguided writing that ends up being more harmful than good regardless of intent, let's talk about the elephant in this 3D animated series. The White Fang. I don't think I'm the most well-equipped person to talk about this subject. Kinda like how I feel Miles and Carrie weren't the most well-equipped people to include an ongoing plotline about a civil rights movement, where the civil rights organization comprised of the oppressed species are the bad guys. This aspect of RWBY has been talked to death and by people much more knowledgeable and eloquent than me, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but it is undoubtedly part of RWBY's DNA, and any retrospective would be incomplete without talking about it in some form. So to put it bluntly, the White Fang storyline that continues up until Volume 5 was a horrible decision. Again, I don't think Miles and Carrie were spouting some anti-civil rights movement message with this storyline, at least not intentionally. I think they wanted to have a compelling antagonistic force that maybe even opened the doors for serious discussions within the story, and they very much failed to do this for numerous reasons, one of which is how they portray members of the White Fang in the show. Because here's the issue with making your main opposing force an oppressed species. You're naturally supposed to feel bad for them. We see in the actual show how Faunus are mistreated and oppressed, albeit briefly because we gotta give time to Jean's bully arc, and through history lessons and lore dumps we know that the Faunus have faced a history of oppression and inequality. So how am I supposed to have fun during the hype fight scenes when I know the people the 3D animated waifus are beating up and some probably maining, because I mean look at the weapons they're being hit with, are an oppressed species who are only doing these things because of the unfair way society treats them? Oh, I have a solution! We'll make them comedically evil. Problem solved. I don't think I need to explain the issues with making it so every member of a civil rights movement is portrayed as comedically villainous, but because RWBY wants to have its cake and eat it too, wanting you to think about the deep and serious Faunus oppression and how it mirrors real-life issues, but still wanting you to have dumb fun during the fight scenes, where you don't have to think about the moral implications of Team RWBY hitting some guy who just wants a better and more fair world for his kids so hard he flies to the moon, they decide to just have all the White Fang members act stupidly evil so they're easy targets to hit without having to feel bad for them. It would be one thing if maybe the fight scenes against the White Fang had more somber tones to reflect the morally gray situation the characters are in, but no. All the fight scenes are the same hype fests with epic rock music. It would be one thing if we were shown that the White Fang were taking things too far and hurting innocent people, but we don't. The most we get of that is Weiss talking about what they did to her father's company and her friends and family. But everything surrounding that scene, and especially the resolution to Weiss's racism arc, that is a crazy sentence, is so botched and incomplete that I don't care. And we also know how her father's company treats the Faunus, so I can't feel too bad that her daddy's company is starting to struggle. I'm getting so sick of being negative. I really don't like bashing on any piece of work and calling it objectively bad, especially because I really don't think Miles and Carrie were trying to be harmful with the White Fang in their portrayal. Like I said earlier, they just weren't well equipped to tackle these topics, and in still doing so, ended up with a storyline that at best is awkward and poorly handled, and at worst is a harmful depiction that casts civil rights movements in a negative light. And I know I'm assuming that wasn't their intent, but I think you can tell from the tone of the show. There's no malicious or hateful vibes in the theming of the show, and even if it was done horribly, the story does make it a point to show that Weiss is obviously wrong regarding her perceptions of the faunus. I think they were earnestly trying to tackle these topics in what they perceived as a thoughtful and nuanced way, having characters like Weiss learn that her ignorant assumptions about a whole species and group of people is incorrect. That doesn't excuse what the show ended up doing and inadvertently saying with their portrayal of the White Fang, but I don't hold any malice or ill will towards the writers for this mistake. It was a stupid and unintentionally harmful portrayal of a subject matter that should be handled with a level of thought and care. And if someone were to hate the show for it, I completely understand. But to me, it is a very unfortunate blemish on a series that I genuinely do think tries to instill a sense of hope, love, and wonder in its viewers. And that's why I can still like RWBY in spite of that. Oh my word, I've gone on for like 2 full script pages about the poor handling of racism in the world of RWBY. Let's get back to the stuff I do like about this series and start talking about the characters. RWBY is a great protagonist for the series. She's not the most particularly deep or intricate character with her motivations, but that doesn't make a character inherently bad. Her simple but optimistic personality makes her a joy to watch as she enthusiastically makes her way through the relatively small-scale events of Volume 1, and her earnest desire to help others, and look cool while doing it, harkens back to the theme of the show quite well, the victory and strength that can be found in a simple soul. She's funny, easy to root for, and seeing how her character transforms over the course of later volumes as the stakes and tone of the show get more serious, make looking back at this simple start to her character work even more. So yeah, she's a simple but good main character, which is especially fitting for an era of the show focused on simpler and smaller scale stuff. Yang is just kinda there. Like RWBY, she's a lot of fun. I like her and Ruby's healthy sister dynamic, and she'll get more to do as soon as Volume 2. I don't mind simple characters in Volume 1 because it really is just the beginning of a larger narrative, and having more simple characters like RWBY and Yang allow us to see how the unfolding events of the story change them for better or for worse. She's definitely my least favorite of the core 4 as of Volume 1 though. Weiss does fall a bit into the snobby rich girl stereotype, but she has enough unique traits of her own to make her stand out as a character. Her design is easily the most simple one in Team RWBY, but I really like how elegant it looks even in its simplicity. Also, I just really like characters who use swords, and her overall abilities really add some unique elements to any given fight scene she's in. Her trying to keep up with the more zany antics of the characters and world around her is really fun to watch, and the genuine friendship she forms with Team RWBY, while being pretty simple in terms of storytelling, is still genuinely heartwarming. I don't mind basic tropes of storytelling, as long as they're still done well enough in a way to get me invested, and Weiss's character growth throughout the volume definitely fits that bill. She's my second favorite character after RWBY at this point, and the less I think about how mishandled her ignorant views of the faunus were in the last 2 episodes, the better. Blake is definitely the most interesting and unique of the main 4 in Volume 1, especially with her brief separation from the group at the end of the volume and revealed that she's a faunus and former member of the White Fang. I like aloof and mysterious characters, so seeing her thrust into the wacky antics and dynamic fight scenes of Volume 1, while still slowly learning more about her personality and past was definitely a highlight of the volume for me. And likewise, seeing how far her friendship with the main cast has grown by the end of the volume is really satisfying. These 4 may not seem like a lot individually, but where they really shine is when they're going through the course of the story together. They all have something unique and fun to add to the group dynamic, and seeing them slowly grow not just as a team, but as friends is one of the show's strong points. And while these characters do really shine as a group, later volumes do make it a point to add even greater depth to each of them on an individual basis. But these characters as they are now are perfect for the tone of RWBY's earlier volumes. And now I'm going to go through the other characters in Volume 1. I'm not going to go through them all, and I might not have a ton to say about each character, but a huge part of RWBY is its expansive cast of characters, so I would feel wrong not mentioning any of the characters outside of the core 4, especially since certain characters like Jean do get a lot more important going forward. Jean I've already talked about, and yeah, he's cringe and kinda pathetic, and maybe that's why I relate to him so much, but I do think he is the perfect type of character for the story. Like, you don't take him seriously at all, and that kinda meshes with the lighthearted vibes of Volume 1. And to the story's credit, when he does eventually start bettering himself and becoming a more competent character overall, you appreciate it more because of his really weak and kind of annoying starting point. And at least the show was smart enough to mostly play him up for laughs. There's not many times where I feel like the writers are begging me to take this goofball too seriously outside of the bully arc. And because of that, there is a lot of great comedy surrounding Jean, like the aforementioned girly scream joke. A lot of the characters view and treat Jean the same way I as a viewer do, and that works for the tone of the story, and it makes things more satisfying when he does actually form meaningful connections with the people around him. The bully arc, yeah, it's cringe, which does match Jean very well, and I have no defense for it. I mean, I like the moment at the end where Pyrrha helps him out but doesn't tell him, and overall just her relationship and dynamic with Jean is the best thing about his character for these first few volumes. So yeah, I do really like Jean because the writers clearly knew how to handle a character like him. He's not taken too seriously outside of the bully arc, and when he's not busy, being used as an excuse to info dump, he can be pretty funny and charming in his cringy ways. Moving on to Pyrrha. I like her. I know famous rich girl who just wants to be treated like normal isn't exactly new, but to be fair, I think a lot of what RWBY does well is taking pretty well-known tropes or character beats and either putting a unique spin on them or executing them just really well. And Pyrrha feels like the latter. Her dynamic with Jean is endearing, and yeah, she's neat. Nora is fun. I really like how she helps solidify my RWBY is secretly Sonic theory, since she has pink motifs in her design and uses a hammer, which reminds me of a certain Sonic character. Other than that, I like her dynamic with Ren. I feel like I'm going to be relying on dynamics a lot for these earlier segments of this retrospective, because some characters have to wait volumes before getting meaningful depth or development, which is fine in an expansive series like RWBY, but it does make analyzing them a tad difficult early on. Ren is cool, and I like he's the straight man to Nora. I'm always a fan of that type of pairing, and the fact that Monty Oum voices him is pretty cool. I honestly don't think it's the best voice acting performance of all time, but the stilted and awkward delivery almost adds to his character in a way, especially when it's contrasted with Samantha Ireland's usually boisterous delivery of Nora's dialogue. Ozpin, mysterious, cool mentor figure. What's not to love? Penny, quirky, fun. Professor Port gives me Eggman vibes for some reason. Wish I had a teacher like him in college. Professor Oobleck. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. I like how every line of dialogue he has makes it sound like Joel Heyman ripped a fat line of coke before recording, and his erratic movements match that energy. He's definitely one of my favorite side characters, and he's a great example of eccentric and fun characters you can find in this series. I'm really glad he gets more time to shine in the second volume. And lastly, Roman Torchwick. I love this man so much. As much as I do enjoy a complex and nuanced villain with personal, engaging reasons for their villainy, sometimes it's great to just have a guy that likes being bad. And that's what Torchwick is, at least for now. He's a 2-bit criminal who's snarky, sassy, and always looks like he's having the time of his life while fighting or ordering his henchmen. He's just a really fun and likable villain. The show makes it hard to really hate him even when he's doing awful things because he's just so damn charming and entertaining. He's also just a perfect antagonist for this beginning portion of RWBY's story. While it's clear there are mysterious forces behind him, he's a relatively small-scale criminal, which fits with the lower stakes and lighter tones of these early volumes. And the fact that he's really fun and energetic matches well with most of RWBY's cast of characters. It's just a great fit, a fun and lively villain for a fun and lively story. And they do eventually delve a little deeper into his character and motivations in a way that feels natural and doesn't lose the spirit of what makes Torchwick so appealing. Recording this is reminding me that I still need to read the Roman Holiday novel, odd that I haven't already considering how weirdly obsessed I am with him. And no, I don't care that his design is just a clockwork orange. He has a cane that's also a gun. It's cool. And that's it for Volume 1 characters. I know I didn't talk about everyone, but like, what do you want me to say about Glinda Goodwitch other than the Rule 34 art of her probably goes hard? And there's some characters who are introduced that become more relevant later on, like Sun for example, but instead of doing what I did for Penny, which was describe her in 2 words, I'd rather just mention them when they're more relevant and backtrack to their introduction if necessary. But yeah, even if they are characters who may seem surface level at first, where RWBY truly excels is crafting fun situations for these characters to bounce off each other, creating memorable story beats and dialogue. This way you still manage to get attached to them, any necessary groundwork for future development can be set up, but the show doesn't take away too much precious screen time from the characters who are more relevant to the story at hand. It's honestly a great balancing act, and I applaud RWBY for how it handles the ambitious size of its cast. Moving on, let's talk about the show's animation and art style. Now obviously a lot of the animation outside of the stellar fight scenes looks janky and like it was made on the budget of a ham sandwich, but there's a lot of skill and creativity in most of the show's cinematography. Even if the character models and their movements look awkward at best, there's a clear effort to still have shot composition that at its worst is competent, but at its best, which it often is at, looks really cinematic. Like, it's obvious that even with their limitations, the creators wanted this series to look as grand as the story was teasing itself to be at times. Whether it just be dynamic shot composition that would make any of my Full Sail professors give me a better grade than they did for my first short film, which I will never make public, or genuinely breathtaking shots that really showcase the scale of RWBY's world and story. I'd say a lot of RWBY Volume 1 is genuinely great looking, obviously budgeted and janky, especially when it comes to character movements, but the fact that they managed to still make so many visually impressive moments, even with these restrictions, is honestly amazing. Obviously there are some things that can't be ignored, like the fact that background characters are literal black silhouettes, characters coping through objects in the environments around them, or just general inconsistencies or mistakes that affect even high-budget productions. But overall, I think Volume 1 looks great all things considered. I don't have much to say about the character designs. I'm not exactly exactly an expert character designer, or a character designer at all, aside from general vibes of what the characters to my original story are gonna look like, but I think they're all pretty cool. There's great variety within the cast, they fit the characters well, and I especially love all the unique weapons, like Ruby's scythe sniper rifle combo, or Blake's sword that she uses the ribbons of to use as a grappling hook. The show definitely has a very distinct sense of style, with its character designs and unique weapon combos, and that makes it so the series stands out well, as well as making sure the combat scenes never grow stale, as oftentimes every weapon has at least one or two different forms or functions than you would think of at first glance. Or maybe they're basic weapons that the characters just find creative ways of utilizing. I know cool isn't the most eloquent word out there, but I feel like that's how RWBY herself would describe the character designs and weapons of the series, so I'm sticking with it. We both have a limited vocabulary, but only one of us has a YouTube channel where we spent almost 3 hours talking about the songs of an 8-episode show. The backgrounds of the show, I mean, you've been looking at them throughout this entire video. They look as rough as you'd expect from the show, but I do think a lot of the interior designs are cool looking, and I especially like the whole aesthetic of Beacon Academy. It's not completely immersed in sci-fi tech, but it has little bits and pieces of that futuristic aesthetic that continues to add complexity to the unique setting of RWBY. But credit where is due for the backgrounds, they get used to great effect in the fight scenes. I adore fight scenes that actually take advantage of the unique set pieces and objects of any given location, and it seems Monty Oum did too, because anything and everything can be used or destroyed in these fight scenes. It adds even more diversity to the already varied fight scenes, and something about seeing these backgrounds just get demolished, well, first of all, it's just kinda satisfying, but it also really sells the threat of any given scene. When you see these locations get mercilessly torn apart or manipulated, it makes you feel like no location, and to a certain extent character, is safe, and that goes a long way in these fight scenes. And they only get more creative and ambitious from here, for a couple volumes at least. It's such an improvement though over two characters just fist fighting or power beam shooting at each other in a location that's barely touched. At that point, you might as well stick the characters in a black void and call it a day. I don't mind those types of fights, but seeing every environment and the objects within actually utilized and reacting to any given fight scene really makes the whole world feel that much more, I don't know, alive. Like, I could probably rattle off to you the specific locations and different stages to my top 5 RWBY fights. But if you ask me to do the same for My Hero Academia, they typically fight under the sky. For the record, I am a My Hero Academia fan, so I wasn't trying to dunk on the series. It's just the first series that came to mind when I needed a comparison. So yeah, while the environments can be either basic or rough looking, I do think the more important ones got a lot going on for them, and where they all truly shine is how they factor into the fight scenes. Like a lot of aspects to RWBY, on its own it may not seem like much, but when it's brought together with the other elements of the show, it creates something truly special. Moving on to the voice acting. It's a bit of a mixed bag. I think some characters do really well straight from the get-go. Like Ruby and Nora's voice actresses seem like they know exactly how they want to perform these characters right from the start, whereas others, not so much. I don't think most of the cast is outright bad. I just think either it was a direction thing or maybe some of them were new to voice acting. I say this because as the series goes on, most, if not all of the characters I think sounded off or stilted, really grow in these volumes, and by 8 and 9 I found myself completely invested in these characters and their dialogue without ever stopping to think a certain line was delivered in an awkward way. Minus maybe one character, but we'll get to her another time. Maybe there wasn't great direction for the lines. Maybe some of these voice actors were new. Maybe they were just trying to get a feel of the characters and tone as they went along. Regardless of the reasons, some of the voice acting is awkward, to put it lightly. Like for example, I love Weiss, minus the racism, right out of the gate, and I think her actual voice and snobby delivery for the most part is really on point. But there's certain scenes where she has to show a bit more depth or range that fall a bit flat, like when she's monologuing to herself about befriending Pyrrha. That's a funny moment for her character, but the delivery of this absurd, almost Death Note-esque scheme is very restrained, so it creates this jarring moment where the character is looking as devious as I do whenever I'm writing a spicy has-been hotel fanfiction to read aloud at family gatherings. It makes the awkward politics discussions end very quickly. And what she's saying is equally devious, but she's saying it in a way that just kind of sounds like she could be saying, "Hey, I'm hungry, let's go get lunch." I know this was an oddly specific example to hone in on, but it's little things like this that make me feel like maybe some of these voice actors were new and trying to figure things out. Because as someone who's been doing a bit more of acting recently, primarily theater, I find myself hesitant and holding back with certain moments when I feel unsure of what I'm doing. It's also the same reason I can never decide if I should hit the gas pedal on a green light. I'm just not there yet. A lot of the voice acting is good, sometimes even great, but there is a decent amount of flat or awkward delivery as well. I think for the most part no voice actor gives a consistently bad performance though. A lot of times they have the general vibe or tone of a character down, and it's only when really needing to push the limits of said character in certain scenes do they fall flat. Especially if it's a comedic scene, because comedy is just a hard thing to deliver and record well. I think the best performances come from Lindsay Jones as Ruby Rose and Miles Luna as Jean Arc. Lindsay just brings the needed optimistic and bubbly energy that a character like Ruby needs to life very well, and I do think she does a good job toning it down for the more serious emotional moments without completely abandoning that side to her character. I know people don't like her voice as the series goes on, I don't mind it as much, but I do think this performance of her by Lindsay Jones is the best she sounds. And Miles Luna just sounds cringy and awkward, which is perfect for Jean's character, but he does bring a certain charm with him that stops my fist from completely destroying my TV while watching RWBY. He still annoys me most of the time, but that's just how his character is right now. I think Miles delivers on exactly what Jean was supposed to be for this first volume. And like I said earlier, comedy is hard to deliver right, and I think Miles nails it. He typically doesn't overact, he just awkwardly stutters or mumbles through his lines and it feels natural. And while he does have more serious moments in this volume, I think Miles Luna gets to really shine in future volumes, when Jean gets a lot more to do other than be cringy? Oh, and I'm gonna mention a third, and that is Torchwick by Gray Haddock, who I know did some not great stuff, but his performance as Torchwick is great. Every line is just belted out with the same enthusiasm Torchwick himself feels when he sees an opportunity to do crime and look cool while doing it. And he has a moment in Volume 3 that I really like. I'm not going to spend time going over who I find to have the weaker performances, because I just want to focus on the stuff I like as much as I reasonably can. I'm still going to talk about the flaws and things I don't like about the show, because part of being a fan of any given media is being able to acknowledge its shortcomings. But I've already talked about how the voice acting can fall flat, so that's enough for me without naming names. I did briefly mention or show a couple quick examples earlier though, if you're dying to know. And that leaves the soundtrack, which I probably won't have too much to say about because everyone already knows how great it is. Epic hard rock and electronic instrumentals matched with Casey Lee Williams' insanely impressive singing makes for some of my favorite music. Yes, the lyrics can be corny, but I don't care. They still relate to the characters and overall story extremely well, and I love how they're actually played during the show itself, primarily during fight scenes. As the show goes on and the quality of the writing starts to waver more than it already does, the vocal tracks can pick up a lot of the slack and really explore these characters and the themes of the story. Some people might find it clunky or distracting to have vocal tracks playing over fight scenes with dialogue in them, and I get that, but I love how connected this soundtrack is to the characters and story, so I really enjoy it. It's unique, you know? You don't see a lot of series do that. Other series mostly focus on epic orchestral music for any intense fight scenes, but having hard rock music blare during all these action sequences makes RWBY feel even more fast-paced and exhilarating than it already does. I don't know, maybe it just reminds me of Sonic final boss fights because a lot of those throughout the series have epic butt rock music blasting in the background. And I know butt rock is a term usually used in a demeaning way for music, but I love that style of music. It may not be considered high art or anything like that, but if music affects you in any positive way, I say it's accomplished its job quite well. Or negatively too, I guess, sad music does exist after all. But yeah, RWBY is 3D anime Sonic with waifus, and RWBY has a great set of vocal tracks for its soundtrack. Also, I focused on the rock aspects because I do feel like that dominates a majority of RWBY's soundtrack, but there are songs with other influences, like Gold, which is a more pop-sounding song. And both Jeff and Casey Lee Williams nail whatever genre or tone they go for with these songs. As for the instrumental tracks, honestly I don't know what to say other than they're really good and fit the vibes of any given scene well. The editor to this video, OtakuBox, is so much better analyzing music than I am, having several videos on his channel dedicated to looking at the soundtracks of certain anime, whereas I know what I like and think is good, and sometimes I can try to explain why that is. Which is ironic considering that I have a nearly 3-hour video dedicated to ranking and analyzing the soundtrack to Hazbin Hotel, and two of my other favorite franchises, Sonic and RWBY, are both extremely well known for their music. But hey, I can't be great at everything, right? Or most things. So yeah, I apologize for the lack of meaningful insight on RWBY's score. But hopefully my 2-page rant about how poorly written Weiss and her racism was makes up for that. I don't know, maybe OtakuBox can leave a B-roll comment about why RWBY's score is great and why I'm a hack of a YouTuber. Also the opening. It's a lot of cool shots with an awesome song. While later volumes would make more of an active effort to have more symbolism and visuals that actually reflect the current state of the story and characters, I don't fault this one for being so vague. There's not a ton to go off of story-wise if the opening wanted to hint at the larger narrative, so I think the opening being just a bunch of cool visuals that loosely relate to the story and characters is fitting for Volume 1 story, which in and of itself is very light on story, at least on a large scale, but it's still hype as hell. The song This Will Be the Day I already talked about earlier in the video why it works so well, but when it's paired with striking visuals of all the characters and the chorus as they all start to fight, it leaves an impression, and if an opening can give you a sneak peek of what a show's gonna be about and get you excited for it, I'd say it's done its job quite well, and that's definitely the case with RWBY's first opening. Some shots sure are just characters standing or have non-existent backgrounds, but one, I've already discussed how I'm forgiving of the visual shortcomings of early RWBY, and two, there's still a lot of amazing moments in this opening. RWBY's section, which ends with half the moon dissolving into flower petals, and she runs to the right of the screen scene, which transitions into the show's title, Blake's shot is just really pretty. The shot that starts zoomed in on Ozpin and Glinda but pans out to reveal the massive size of the airship they're on. The story for the majority of Volume 1 may be relatively small scale and lighthearted, but this opening wants you to be pumped about it regardless. Listen, anything that can make a high school setting seem exciting is a win in my book. And that's all I got for RWBY Volume 1. It's a great start to this long-running series that mostly focuses on the light-hearted, action-packed high school shenanigans, but it does dip its toes enough into the grander scale or scope of the story to set up what's to come. But what's most important is it's a good foundation to build on. It still has its own mini-arcs and character development that wrap up by the end of the season, which manages to make it feel like a complete entity in its own right. But now Volume 2 and onwards can use what's been established already to heighten the stakes and show overall to greater heights. The visuals can be janky at times, but the unique character designs, the various locations that flesh out the setting of RWBY and get absolutely demolished in action sequences, the cinematic quality of the show's overall shot composition, editing, and directing, and lastly, of course, Monty Oum's legendary fight scenes with memorizing choreography that takes full advantage of each character's unique weapons, fighting style, and the environments around them, make it so the show still feels high quality despite its graphical or budget-related limitations. I'm just realizing now I didn't even dedicate a section solely to the fight scenes of RWBY, but I really don't know what I could say that hasn't already been discussed by those much more knowledgeable than me. Monty Oum was a legendary creator of action sequences, every movement and action feeling like steps to a dance, further helped by how they're often timed to the beat of the music. I'm using vague terminology because I don't fully understand the intricacies of it all, but all his sequences just had a certain, almost mesmerizing flow to them that makes them so satisfying to watch. Not to mention exciting because of how fast-paced they are and how crazy they get with some of the characters' unique weapons and fighting styles. Like the final fight against Torchwick and the White Fang of Volume 1 is a damn near masterpiece, even without Casey Lee Williams screaming some on-the-nose lyrics about the events of the story. I actually think some of that fight was reused from one of Monty's earlier animations, and this would not be the last time RWBY reused some of Monty's earlier work. Monty knew how good he was because he decided to plagiarize himself. In all seriousness, while I do still quite enjoy a good portion of the RWBY fights post-Volume 3, it is very clear where Monty's involvement unfortunately stops, because the fight scenes do undergo a drastic change. And change isn't necessarily bad, especially when there's nothing that can be done about the situation, as was the case with Monty's passing, but I do think a lot of the fights that ended up just being okay in future volumes could have become masterpieces in their own right if Monty was still alive and well. I really admire Monty Oum as a creator and as a person, and even though he was already gone by the time I started RWBY, I was very sad when I stopped binging RWBY and had time to process that the person who was so instrumental in creating what's now one of my favorite animated properties is no longer alive. Maybe in a future separate video, I'll do a little tribute love letter to Monty and why I admire him not just for his technical skills in creating amazing action sequences, but also just admiring him as a person and a creator. I'd want to do that separately from this retrospective video series because I will at times be getting a little more negative and jaded with RWBY, especially when we get to Volume 5, and I'd want a video honoring his legacy to be more on the positive side. But yeah, I guess this rant ended up being my discussion of not only RWBY's fight scenes, but also just Monty Oum overall. Rest in peace to a legendary creator, and thank you so much for what you made. RWBY is still to this day such a huge source of inspiration and comfort to me, and I'm sure it will be for quite some time. Getting back to Volume 1, visually Volume 1 still manages to be fantastic despite its shortcomings. The characters are mostly all simple, but really enjoyable and have great potential for future development. The show has a unique sense of identity with its character design, setting, and hype-inducing soundtrack. The fight scenes, as I've already discussed, are fantastic, and overall, it's just fun. And I don't mean that in a lazy, ignore its shortcomings way, because the show definitely has its shortcomings, which I've already discussed, and will continue to discuss going forward. But there's just this undeniable feeling of delight you get watching these fun characters screw around in this eccentric and action-heavy setting. I think it works really well with how I view these earlier volumes as a representation of growing up and getting closer to adulthood. And while I don't agree with the sentiment that RWBY loses all its optimistic charm after Volume 3, these volumes, minus the final part to Volume 3, do clearly have a much more enjoy the ride kind of vibe, which does fade away as the story focuses on its larger stakes and threats after Volume 3. I still think most of RWBY manages to be a hopeful and exciting journey, but how it conveys those ideas is noticeably different than the earlier volumes, which were much more focused on being whimsical adventures with the occasional heavy or intense moment. But like I said earlier, I don't think change is bad, and the core of RWBY as a series still remains intact throughout its run, at least in my opinion. To start wrapping things up, I thought it would be a fun idea to go over some of my favorite things from each volume at the end of these videos. So, get ready for some basic-ass choices, because I'm going to tell you my favorite song, fight, and character from Volume 1 of RWBY. My favorite song, and I know this is like everyone's favorite, but it's Red Like Roses Part 2. I mean, there's a reason it's so iconic. An epic and tragic rock song, delving into RWBY and her mother's relationship that plays over a fantastic action sequence that sees all these characters we've come to know use their unique weapons and abilities to take down a Deathstalker and Nevermore more, yeah, it's pretty amazing. As for my favorite fight, that would be the final fight in Volume 1 against the White Fang, but more specifically, against Torchwick. I could watch the scene of Blake creating shadow clones of herself around Torchwick, which he dispatches with ease for hours on end. Then him dealing with Sun's nunchuck shotgun combo attack is just the icing on the cake. The fact that he's able to hold his own against the two of them at the same time also does a good job at showcasing that while he may seem like an average thug type, he's a formidable adversary for the characters to face. And as for my favorite character, Torchwick is probably going to dominate these early volumes, but for the sake of not just saying him each time, I'll say he's tied with RWBY herself this volume. While she doesn't go through a ton of development in this volume, she's just a really likable protagonist who's easy to root for. She's funny, energetic, and has a cool weapon. What more could you ask for right now? Maybe a conclusion section to this video. I hope you all enjoyed this first part to my RWBY retrospective series. This will probably be the longest one in this series for the next couple videos because I had a lot of build up to do, but I hope you stick around to see what else I have to say about the oncoming volumes. The next parts will have a lot more of me talking about specific elements and plot points as I go throughout the volumes, something I didn't do as much of in this part. Even though I did talk a good chunk about the characters and some specific plot points, I feel like Volume 1 is more important for the tone it sets and the build up for stuff that will be paid off in later volumes. Of course, that's done through character introductions and world building, but since Volume 1 is relatively short and not a ton of major plot progression happens in terms of the overarching narrative, I feel like if I tried to go episode by episode, I would just be recapping a lot of stuff, kind of like I did for episode 1. But now with Volume 2 onwards, we get to see what RWBY does with everything it's set up, how it changes, and if it improves any of the critiques I have with this first part of the story. I also didn't go super in depth with the fights and soundtrack, because those are the things that everyone online already talks about to death, and I'd say for the most part agrees on, whereas I want these videos to be my unique perspective or thoughts on this series, what it means to me, why I love it, and why I think it succeeds at what it sets out to do despite its flaws. I'll still talk about them, especially the fights post Volume 3, but they won't be the focus of these videos. Most people already agree that the early fights and all of RWBY's soundtrack is good. I want to bring a little more positivity regarding the less enjoyed parts of RWBY in the general public, which is kind of everything after Volume 3. I'll still be fair and critical, but spoiler alert, I like all of RWBY, except for maybe the Justice League crossover movies, those are weird. If you did like this video and want to see my future RWBY stuff as well as other content from me, such as visual novel reviews or Has-Been Hotel stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel and checking out some of my other videos. And thank you to those who are already subscribed and continue to support the channel. Shout out as always to the two members of the Noah's Archivist tier of this channel, Big Tasty and Christina Sematonis. The last thanks goes to the talented editor of this video, Otaku Box. A link to his channel can be found in the description, and I highly recommend checking out some of the cool content he has to offer on his channel, such as his most recent upload as of recording this video, which is about Kowloon generic romance. And as always, please comment down below your thoughts on anything I discussed in this video. I have a lot to say about RWBY, as you'll no doubt come to see over the course of this video series, so I'd love to talk about this wonderful show with you all. But until then, I will see you all in the next video.